Basically, there's 5 steps to going through the anger process, with the first one becoming aware that you're angry. The second thing is become aware of your unawareness. In other words, how are you disguising your anger? The third thing is to understand how you're a victim and admit it. The next step, this is a part of the entire book that there's no shortcut, but it's really simple, is that there's no point that you're going to wake up one morning and say, I don't want to be a victim. You are always going to want to be a victim. So I actually have my patients sometimes just sit in the room, I'll leave, and say, when you walk out of this door, you're simply going to make a commitment, I'm not going to be a victim. Now, it may last for 5 or 10 minutes, it may last for a day or two. You'll go back into the victim role, it feels really good and powerful. So I just have to over and over again say, look, not going to do that, not going to do that. It's not positive thinking, it's just simply a choice. I'm not going to be a victim.
The Vidal Speaks podcast.
Episode number 84, Dr. David Hanscom on anger and forgiveness. Welcome to Vidal Speaks. My name is Deborah Vidal, former 11-year LPGA golf pro turned classical homeopath, certified plant-based nutritionist, and wellness coach. Each week here on Vidal Speaks, we bring you knowledge, inspiration, or natural remedies to help you take charge of your health and feel your best. I believe health is freedom and knowledge is power, so tuning in each week will give you the power to take steps towards freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back from having the energy to do all you want in life. No matter where you are in your journey of wellness, Vidal Speaks can help. I promise. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. How are you guys doing this week? Are you having a good one? I sure hope so. I'm excited about today's show because many of you out there have been listening for some time now, and you know that I have a passion to help people heal. And there's so many people stuck in these chronic pain syndromes, and they're told they have Lyme's or fibromyalgia or some autoimmune disease, or that they need some spine surgery. Yet no medical treatment seems to help any of them in any way. Chronic pain is so debilitating to living life, and once in this cycle, the person can only think about pain, 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 and nothing else. Today I have back on the show Dr. David Hanscom, the well-known Seattle spine surgeon and pain specialist, because he helps people heal every day from this pain, not by doing any medical treatments. In Dr. David's previous episode with me, which is episode 71, he told us that pain pathways become permanent after even just 30 days, and the only way out of them is to retrain the nervous system to rewire around those pathways and form new pathways. This idea that we can rewire the brain is called neuroplasticity, and it's relatively new, but Dr. Hanscom teaches his patients how to do it every day. But before that, he teaches his patients the underlying cause of their pain, which is anxiety or anger. He says that anger and anxiety are the same to the brain. They are adrenaline shooters. That's what I like to call them. And he says that anger is anxiety on steroids, but both are emotions that cause the body to fire off adrenaline, which in turn damages the nerves and causes lots of pain. He explains it all in his book and website articles. His book is called Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain, and his website is backincontrol.com, and it has so many great articles, so please be sure to check it out. Since anger is the emotion that fires off huge surges of adrenaline, and this over-adrenalizes our nervous system and kills our nerves and causes so much pain in our bodies, I wanted to speak to Dr. Hanscom more about anger, because it's only natural that we all have to deal with this emotion in life, so we should learn the right way to do this. Part of healing from pain is to learn the art of forgiveness. I once read a quote that I just love that makes the biggest case for why we should learn to forgive. Here's the quote: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and to discover that the prisoner was you." That's by Lewis Smedes. Isn't that so true, though? Most of the time, we're so angry at someone and we're unable to forgive them, and they're off smiling and living life while we're suffering and destroying ourselves with that anger and unwillingness to forgive. Dr. Hanscom recommends a book on forgiveness to all his patients that he coaches out of their pain called Forgive for Good by Fred Luskin. You can also see a lot of Luskin's work on YouTube if you're interested. I think one of the hardest things about forgiveness for me is to know if you've really forgiven someone. You may tell yourself that you have, but Fred says in his book that when you can speak about that topic in a normal tone of voice and you don't bring it up that much anymore, then it's likely that you've forgiven. I thought that's good advice. Forgiveness is not an easy thing, but we all have to learn the art of forgiveness because it's inevitable we're going to need it so many times in our life. Life is full of disappointments or things to be angry about if we let ourselves hook onto these events. So forgiveness is our way to free ourselves from this prison. I have seen over the years in my homeopathic practice patients with cancer, pain syndromes, autoimmune diseases, along with so many other chronic symptoms whose etiology or cause of their condition was from a specific incident. For example, let's say someone had a huge grief, which often can lead to an anger, or they may have experienced a betrayal, which led to a divorce, or they had a huge shock or accident. So as a practitioner, I get how these events cause anger and anxiety, and that in the end, this oversensitizes the nervous system and causes them permanent pathways that many get stuck in. Homeopathy has been very helpful in helping patients back from these kind of emotional events because when you treat the cause, you can truly heal. Today's focus is on how the emotions of anger and anxiety affect our nervous system and how Dr. Hanscom has been able to help patients override and rewire new pathways that go around that permanent pain pathway. If you remember in episode 71, he spoke of what he thought were the keys. They were being aware, expressive writing, mindfulness, or he called active meditation, which was similar, and lots of forgiveness. But once we're aware of the cost of not forgiving, then I think for many it gets a lot easier to learn to forgive. Still, forgiveness is very difficult, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Hanscom give us all the wisdom he has learned because he teaches all about anger and forgiveness. And whether you're suffering from some kind of pain syndrome or back pain or have no symptoms at all, I promise you'll learn a lot from this episode because one thing that's certain in life, we're going to deal with some kind of anger, frustration, or anxiety, and we have to learn how to handle it best for our nervous system. This is an episode you'll for sure want to download and re-listen to a few times, I think. What he says is very deep and very profound. Try to listen with a very open mind though, okay? Since Dr. David has been on the show before, I'm not going to read his extensive bio. Please check out his website to learn all about him and read all of his work. It's worth a visit to his website, I promise. Okay, so before we start, let me tell you a little bit about him though. Dr. David Hanscom is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon specializing in complex spine problems in all areas of the spine. He has expertise in adult and pediatric spinal deformities such as scoliosis and kyphosis. A significant part of his practice is devoted to performing surgery on patients who have had multiple prior spine surgeries. He is the co-director of the Swedish Neuroscience Specialists in Seattle, Washington, and a member of the Best Doctors of America. I just want to read some of his published article titles because they're really great. You can find a lot of these on his website. The Cry of Chronic Pain, Back from the Edge, Coping with Physician Stress, A Surgeon's Perspective on the Hoffman Process, Physician Suicide, My Journey, Aching Back, ? Why Surgery is Not Indicated for Lower Back Pain. Dr. Hanscom co-founded the program Awake at the Wound with his golf instructor, David Alamy, which is a process that brings athletic performance principles into the operating room. I love that, bringing golf techniques into the operating room. All right. And lastly, Dr. Hanscom is the author of his book called Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain, and I highly recommend you read it because he explains in full detail why his method works and what you need to do to get out of chronic pain or chronic anxiety. This book will be a miracle to many and already has been, so I'm thrilled to have him again on my show today to speak to us about anger and forgiveness. Hi, Dr. David. Thank you so much for being here today to speak about forgiveness. And it's such an honor to have you back, especially because I love this topic of today. Forgiveness is certainly a subject we all need to get better at. So welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So let's start out by just telling us, how did you get involved in becoming a forgiveness expert?
Well, I'm not sure I'm a forgiveness expert. I've had more experience with it than I would like, so I learned a lot by experience. But I've also watched my patients get better, and what happened in retrospect, I did not realize it at the time, is that I developed chronic pain myself for about 15 years. And what happened, I started having these panic attacks in 1990 without any idea what those were. And it spiraled into a full-blown burnout, obsessive-compulsive disorder, anxiety for the next 12 or 15 years. And I had no idea what was going on. I was sweating, I wasn't sleeping, my back hurt, I had burning in my feet, ringing in my ears. I had all these symptoms, which in retrospect were because my body was full of adrenaline. So what I now know is I got myself into trouble because I had a tough, abusive childhood. I, at age 15, basically shut the door on my life, and what the psychologists would call dissociated, just simply started my life over again. And I developed my identity of being smart, athletic, all sorts of stuff. And I had a great time. I did it. I was flat out having the best time of my life, going to medical school, learning all sorts of stuff. And then also I started developing panic attacks when I was about 38 years old, out of the blue, no reason at all. And I certainly didn't think I was angry at all. In fact, I thought I was pretty cool. And then when I finally started coming out of this tailspin, it was around 2002, 2003, about 12, 13 years later, I read a book called Feeling Good by David Burns. And David Burns taught about anxiety and anger. I still didn't think it applied to me. And I was going through a tough personal time, and I again thought I was pretty cool, bring it on, no problem. But I didn't realize I'd become an incredible master at suppressing anger. What we now know is when you suppress thoughts and emotions, particularly anger, your body's going to react badly. In other words, when you think about something that makes you upset, why your body's full of adrenaline and stress chemicals, which causes physical changes, but when you suppress it, it's even worse. So what was happening, I had no feeling of anger. I would become frustrated, all sorts of stuff that I thought was just normal, but I didn't acknowledge the fact that I was angry. So my circumstances personally became so severe in 2002, 2003 that I flat out became angry. And I thought I was just becoming angry. What I didn't realize, I had at least a whole lifetime of anger. And when it exploded, it was just brutal. I did not do it very well. I did not process it very well. I somehow muddled through it. But about 6 months later, once I understood somewhat the extent of my anger, my symptoms started to disappear. And so I started sharing a lot of these tools with my patients for a while, and I still didn't quite put the anger thing into perspective. I just knew looking backwards that the anger was a big issue in my own healing. And then I started sharing this book with my patients called Forgive for Good by Dr. Fred Luskin out of Stanford. That was about 7 years ago. And that's when my patients started to become pain-free. You go, okay, this is interesting. And I also realized back in 2002, about a year before I started to heal, that I actually acknowledged the fact that I was angry, and I realized I was in a victim role. I realized I didn't really understand what being a victim meant. And it became very clear to me that the genealogy of anger is you basically have a circumstance that you blame, then you're victim, then you're angry. And I remember in 2002, I was watching my now wife and daughter wash the car, beautiful sunny day. I was absolutely anxious, frustrated, spinning out of control. And it just hit me that there's no answer to this, that I was completely a victim. And I kept looking for some solution to being a victim. And what I now realize that being a victim is such a powerful role that nobody wants to give it up. People become addicted to being a victim because it's so powerful. So when I realized that was the issue, that was a turning point in my healing where I truly started to heal. And again, I've been pretty symptom-free for about 10 years.
I can imagine that when somebody's anger and they're not suppressing it, that you're shooting off a bunch of adrenaline. So that can't be good. But what you're saying is that if you get angry and you don't act out and you suppress it, then that's not good either. So what's the middle ground? What's left?
It's actually worse to suppress than it is to experience. In fact, there's a whole bunch of research now being done on thought suppression. And when you suppress thoughts and emotions, you basically cause brain damage. And what it does, you actually cause damage to what's called the hippocampus of your brain, which is the memory center. And so suppressing emotions is really dangerous. And so you have to allow yourself to experience emotions. In other words, you have to allow yourself to feel uncomfortable emotions like anxiety and anger. And once you allow yourself to feel those emotions, and let them pass through you. It may take a minute, may take an hour, may take a day or longer, but you learn not to react to them. It's sort of a learned skill. Then they start losing their power. If you want to do battle with these circuits or do battle with anger, it's impossible to win. And the problem is anger is this automatic survival reaction. And so if something threatens you, you become anxious. Then if you can't solve the problem quickly, your body secretes more adrenaline and you become angry. So anger is basically anxiety on adrenaline. It's a survival response that if you are anxious and not having a need met, your body will secrete more adrenaline to solve the problem, and then you become angry.
So you're saying anger is like anxiety on steroids?
Correct.
So by saying that suppression of emotions is so dangerous, you're not offering an invitation to go and fly off the handle and be angry, though, because then a person could say, well, it's dangerous to suppress it, so I'm just going to release it. But in that process of releasing it, they hurt a lot of people. So I find it hard to know what the middle ground is. If it's horrible to suppress it and it's horrible to express it, then what is the exact best way to handle being angry?
So especially just a learned skill. Okay, there's no magical solution to this, is that when you're angry or triggered, you simply learn not to take action. And so you simply, it's a discipline, just a simple choice that I'm really angry. And you start to become aware that anger is actually temporary insanity. You see things only through your eyes. You cannot see the whole picture. You make bad decisions. The adrenaline actually shuts down the blood supply to the frontal lobe of the brain, so you can't even think clearly, right? So when you're angry, it's only about your survival. That's it. So what you eventually learn to do is first of all, become aware that you're angry. And as far as solving anger, you first have to become aware of it. So you become aware you're angry. You realize that you're now in a temporary state of insanity. And you learn simply to withdraw. You just don't say anything. So whenever you act in anger, remember, anger is about you. Anger is only destructive. But it's a 360, it's like a scatter bomb. It goes off in every direction. So if you're angry at person X, guess what? The same anger is coming right back to you. So anger is destructive, including self-destructive. And so you can't contain it, but you can sort of let it explode. You learn simply not to take action, because any action you take will be damaging, either to fellow employees, to bosses, to spouses, to children. So you just learn to just zip it. And then once the anger passes, then you can move on and solve the situation. What was extremely sobering to me, even as I talk about it, is that I wrote a section in my book called The Disguises of Anger. And see, the problem with anger is that probably the most common way that people successfully suppress anxiety is that they're angry. So remember, anxiety represents a feeling of feeling vulnerable and helpless. It's very much of a survival instinct. People hate it. So anger represents power. So the feeling of anger covers up the feeling of anxiety, but at the same time, it actually fires up the nervous system even more. So even though you cover up the feeling of anxiety, you actually physiologically crank up the body even more. So that's why people don't want to give it up, because a lot of my patients, as they start to let go of their anger, they actually feel much more anxiety.
And although our topic is forgiveness, we have to speak about anger because we can see now how closely related they are. When people have chronic anxiety syndromes, they have a lot of frustration and anger behind that. And so when they get relief from their anger, then you say their anxiety gets a bit worse, right?
Temporarily worse. Again, this is a learned skill. And again, the reason why talk therapy by itself doesn't work is because anxiety and anger are part of this automatic survival response. That part of the brain, the unconscious part of the brain, which ensures survival, has been documented to be about 1 million times stronger than the conscious brain. So if you're going to fight anger with talk therapy alone, you can't win. So you have to allow yourself to feel the anger. You have to allow yourself to feel the anxiety. Then you basically start training your brain to separate from it and just start moving through it. If you want to fight it and solve it and fix it, you're actually giving it neurological attention and you actually reinforce those pathways. So what you do with forgiveness is that you acknowledge the problem or the situation. Remember, the genealogy of anger is you have a circumstance that you blame, then you're a victim, and then you're angry. So an incredible number of people, in fact, the research shows something like 90-95% of people who had an injury, whether it's a car accident or an employer or a person, still blame the person that caused the problem. So there's a saying that neurons that fire together, so remember, pain causes anger. Okay, these are just pathways. They're linked pathways. So when outside stresses cause anxiety and anger, those are now linked to pain pathways. And almost all my patients immediately pick up the fact that when they're stressed out and upset, their pain goes up. And so they're just linked pathways. The other part of the problem is that when you're angry, your body's adrenaline really cranks up. So the animal studies show that when your adrenaline levels are high or the stress chemicals are high, it increases the conduction of the nerves, so you actually feel the pain more because your nerves are conducting more quickly. From a survival sense, that makes sense because remember, when you're being threatened, your whole nervous system is going to be hypervigilant, so it makes sense that you'd be more sensitive to pain. So you have this paradox going where you have a legitimate reason to be angry. Somebody did something bad at work. You have a right to hold on to it. But the problem is, as long as you hold on to it, again, neurons that fire together wire together, as long as you hold on to that anger, you are not going to get rid of your pain. You cannot get rid of your pain as long as you're holding on to that original anger.
So even if, let's say, somebody was in a horrible car accident and that you're obviously a spine surgeon, you see a lot of this, and they were hurt, and ever since they have this horrible pain, as long as they're holding on to feeling the victim from the person that hit them because of this accident, they're kind of permanently wiring their pathways of pain to be permanent.
Yep.
And then that every day that goes by, they're probably becoming more angry at this person. Yep. And more angry at their situation because they feel trapped and in pain. And so then it's kind of like a vicious circle that it's not even a vicious circle. It's almost like it's growing.
Yeah, so Dr. Luskin pointed out that forgiveness is not a religious sense at all. So in the end of the day, forgiveness is actually a selfish act. It's a necessary selfish act. Okay, this person really wronged me. But guess what? I'm now giving my entire life over to somebody that I really hate. So there's nothing that says you have to like this person ever. The person committed a crime, they need to be punished. So that's not the forgiveness we're talking about. We're saying, look, I understand the problem. I'm simply going to let it go, not intellectually, but really truly let it go and let this person off the hook in your brain. Because what happened, so Dr. Luskin's research on forgiveness was pretty deep. He did 4 major projects, with 2 of the projects being with the parents of children who had been murdered. Okay, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So his point being that the parents have a right to be angry. They've lost their kids, but now they have given up their whole quality of life to people that they despise. So forgiveness means that you understand this happened, it's done. And really, I tell my patients that have made major losses, the best thing you can do for your loss is to live a life that's worth living. Staying angry at the person who committed the crime is not living your life to its fullest. So what you're doing is that you're simply taking your life back.
And what would that look like? Because that's such a hard thing to imagine. I can kind of say that I have a little bit of personal experience with this because we lost my sister when she was 37 years old, and I watched my mom and dad really struggle with this. And my mom especially was very angry over the situation. And just physically, I saw how she created a very angry skin rash that no doctor could heal. And thankfully, I was early into homeopathy at the time, and I was able to help her through a lot of these emotions of anger and all the skin rashes. But I used to tell her all the time, Mom, you know, your anger's hurting you more than the person you're angry at. So I get what you're saying, but wow, it's such a hard thing to do, to think that someone murdered your child and now you have to forgive them for you, even if it's just for you. But what does that look like? It's okay never to talk to them and not like them, but I find that hard to know. Like, how do you truly know you've forgiven them then if you don't talk to them and you still don't like them?
Well, you don't. So it's a process, and I learned this again from Dr. Leska, but also my own experience, is that forgiveness is a process. So we try to define forgiveness in sort of rational terms. And so every time you think about that person that murdered your child or whatever this person did to you, your body's going to react. You will be upset. Okay. So do you define anger as not being upset anymore when that happens? The answer is no. So the question, you think the thought, you've now connected those pathways to that situation, your body reacts, and that'll happen every time you think about that person. So it's a process. And it doesn't get better with time. So in fact, actually with time and anger, anger gets worse with time, not better with time. And people say time heals, and time heals if you go through a letting go process. If you don't go through a letting go process, time actually works against you.
Yeah, because it's building, it's kind of growing.
Right. So when you go into day-to-day life, so I went through this whole conniptions of what's forgiveness, have I really forgiven people? And it doesn't matter. Remember, the whole process of coming out of chronic pain is actually connecting with life in front of you and living life to its fullest. So it doesn't mean fixing the past or fixing anger. It means letting go for a minute, a day, a week, whatever it is. When that feeling of anger comes over you, you allow it to happen, you let it pass through, and then you move on to the next thing. So people get themselves in knots. Have I really forgiven? Have I not really forgiven? Well, guess what? Those are intellectual means to deal with these irrational circuits, and it's a mismatch. So you understand that you're never going to have perfect forgiveness. So I'd like to just digress to a different direction just for a second, because the problem isn't that person who murdered your child. It's your need to be a victim no matter what. In other words, being a victim is the most powerful role in the human existence. People do not want to give it up. People become very addicted to their anger. They become addicted to their pain. So what happens, the anger manifests itself in many ways. So first of all, people take on world suffering, ISIS or politics or whatever. So they're constantly looking at the news. They're constantly upset. And Dr. Luskin calls it the unenforceable rules, is when you get upset about something that you have no control over, you're wasting your time. So I don't like ISIS, but I can't do anything about it. So it's my responsibility to actually live my life in a full way so I can influence the people around me in a positive way. So again, taking on world suffering is one way of remaining a victim. The other one that's more deadly is perfectionism. So I'm convinced the reason why perfectionism even exists is because of this need to be a victim. So remember, the genealogy is circumstance that you blame, then you're a victim, then you're angry. So with perfectionism, you have a situation that's never perfect. You blame yourself for the situation for being less than perfect. You're a victim of less than perfect. You blame the situation of less than perfect. You're now a victim, and then you're angry. So if you're perfectionistic, you get to always be a victim indefinitely. So again, another way of staying on to anger. Another way people do it is that they're having a great day, relaxed out in the sunshine, taking a walk, and they'll think about their boss at work and get upset. Well, again, they now have gone from relaxing to a victim role. But that happens for another reason, is that your brain and nervous system is designed to scan the environment for danger every second to protect you. So I wrote a website post called Your Personal Brain Scanner, is that you're always scanning the environment for danger. So if things are going well, your brain's always going to find something to land on. So again, another way of staying in the victim role. So the problem isn't necessarily a person who murdered your child. So let's say you forgave that person or not. Your brain's going to find something else to land on to create that victim role. The problem is victimhood.
Mm-hmm. So when you were talking about perfectionism, I want to go over that and tell me again how perfectionism is related to being a victim.
Yeah, so perfectionism does not exist in the human existence, right?
You're basically saying there is no perfect action.
Right, and then I learned this from Dr. David Burns in his book, Feeling Good, but his point is that the difference between reality and your concept of perfection is your degree of unhappiness. So then I took that into the model that I've learned about anger, this genealogy of anger. So you have a circumstance that's less than perfect, or you're less than perfect, and then you're going to blame that situation, and then you're a victim of less than perfect, and then you're always agitated.
Got it.
Right? You cannot be happy if you're perfectionistic. So the biggest thing with forgiveness is forgiving yourself. And again, this is not intellectual exercise. This is feeling the self-hate and everything that we go through, the negative self-talk. Again, your body is designed to look for danger, including your own self. So the body's or nervous system's default mechanism is to go to the negative. And the perfectionism again, is just one form of doing that. So we talk about, so what I learned from one of my mentors is that is perfectionism, by the way, that burns out physicians and professionals, because we sort of use this negative energy, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, that keeps driving us up the hill to achieve. So in one way it works, but on the other hand is that drive that takes us up the hill takes us right down the other side.
Exactly. I know that as a professional athlete.
Right. So there's a big difference between that and what we call a vision of excellence. The vision of excellence says, look, I'm here. This is where I want to go. These are the steps that I have to take to get there. But there's no negative energy driving you. It says, and what the paradox is you let go of this driving, anxiety, anger-driven energy. Your body is not adrenalized. You're not burning up energy that you don't need to burn up. So your capacity actually to accomplish your vision and goal goes up dramatically. So I was perfectionistic. I was like a hot knife through butter in college and medical school. I did very well. And then all of a sudden I started having panic attacks. So I didn't become a major surgeon by having anxiety. I became a major spine surgeon by suppressing anxiety. But again, the main way I suppressed it was being a perfectionist, which is a form of anger. So I was so driven by this perfectionism that I actually didn't feel the anxiety. But my ears were ringing, my feet were burning, my scalp was itching, these skin rashes were breaking out all over my whole body. I had no idea what was going on. So even though I didn't feel anger or anxiety, it just was being perfectionistic, that was my story, I completely suppressed it mentally and emotionally. But again, the body doesn't let you get away with it. So my body was cranked full of adrenaline. So paradoxically, since I'm not always adrenalized all the time, I probably have 3 times the energy I had in high school. I'm not burning it up all the time. And I get physically tired just by, I work really hard. I like doing what I'm doing. But when you're on a vision of excellence, it's just one big adventure versus a negative, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. That's not a vision of excellence. It just wears you out.
Yeah, right. So what kind of definition would you put behind the word forgive?ness?
Just letting go. Just simply letting go.
Letting go.
And,
letting go. That's good.
Yeah, and so there's also a book I've recommended on my website now called The Way to Love by Anthony DeMello. It's a really simple book about awareness. And again, one thing we do to ourselves as being perfectionists means we label. And one point that really sticks with me, I read this book every day a little bit, is that when you label anybody or judge anybody, you simply lost awareness. All you've done is project your interpretation of reality onto that person. It's like one big movie projector. So first of all, it's tedious, always projecting your view onto the world. Second of all, once you put a label on a person, either positive or negative, you've completely lost sight of who that person is. So it's a positive judgment or negative judgment, it's still judgment. You've completely lost awareness of who this person is. So his answer to the problem, which I have to agree with now, it took me a while to figure this out, is to becoming aware. So if you forgive somebody, that's great. If you're suppressing, if you have anger, it makes it worse. If you suppress anger, that's worse. If you intellectually work on forgiveness and go through these mental games, it doesn't work either. You're firing off the circuits. So these circuits are so powerful, you simply have to let go. And you become aware. You become aware when you're angry. You become aware when you're suppressing anger. You just become aware. And somehow the brain, once you become aware, the problem somehow starts to solve it. What's incredibly sobering to me pretty much every day is that I realize now that I probably spent my first 50 years of life basically being in a baseline state of anger in the form of perfectionism and all sorts of stuff. So I disguised it very well with achievement, being right, rigid structured thinking. Those are all disguises of anger. But I didn't know any different. I had no awareness that I was angry at all. I was completely disconnected from it. So what happened now is that I'm not angry most of the time. In fact, I get tired and physically active, but I'm not angry. So I go in the victim role probably 5 to 7 times a day, and I can now see and feel the temporary insanity. It doesn't make any sense. So it's sobering for me to realize I spent my entire life like that without any awareness at all that I was even angry. So now that I can see the difference, it's extremely sobering to realize I spent most of my life like that.
Well, it's interesting because you turned us on to that little book, The Way to Love or The Way of Love, and it's so good. That guy's amazing. It's like you said, it's small and it's really profound, and I have it on my table here, but it is really almost the key to the whole puzzle is awareness, isn't it? Because without that, you for sure can't heal.
Right. The other thing is, there's a book, Feeling Good by David Burns, who gets all these cognitive distortions in place. And the reality is, we should look at his cognitive distortions very carefully. The result of almost all of them is some degree of anger. So let's take the word should. Should thinking is one of the cognitive distortions. And so you think something should be like this, and it's not, of course, you become upset, right? And of course, should is a perfectionism word, or the word should not is one of them. Or, for instance, we catastrophize. We blow things way out of proportion. We get upset. We get agitated. Again, another form of anger. So the other awareness to consider developing, and made a huge difference for me, is that he has a 3-column technique. He has 10 different cognitive distortions like should thinking, labeling, catastrophizing, emphasizing the negative, de-emphasizing the positive, emotional reasoning. All these things are things that actually upset you, but they're just thoughts. So once you become aware that these thoughts have on your nervous system, again, awareness is a big deal. You simply write down the thoughts. You then categorize them into one of those 10 areas of thinking, or whatever number categories you want to use. Then you write down the more rational thought. So you just become, again, it's an awareness model of becoming aware of what these thoughts are doing to your nervous system.
Before you go on there, can you use what you just said about categorizing those into those 10 categories and give us an example? Because you were talking about this on the phone to us, and I love this. So you were saying, like, an example would be if your wife, you were supposed to meet her for dinner and she was late and you were upset about it. So give us an example like that and show us what category that would go in and how you would work yourself through the thinking process.
So first of all, it has you write things down. And, on another show, we've already discussed the impact of writing on changing the nervous system. So what he has you simply write down the thoughts. So I'll just give you one example, is one where, and my wife knows I use this all the time. It's sort of a joke, maybe not so much of a joke, but it's about time. And so I tend to get irrationally upset when she's late. And then she's sort of a late person in general, at least she used to be, and I'm sort of over punctual. So I guess I'll use the word, it's an opportunity for both of us to practice our tools. So what happens is that she's late 5, 10, 15 minutes. My brain starts going into, she's inconsiderate. So I start labeling her as this, this, and this. And I realize that I've now put all these labels on her. And so I write down the thought she's inconsiderate. I would categorize that as labeling or catastrophizing. Then in the third column, I would write down she's late. Maybe she got delayed with something. I really don't know what the issue is. We'll talk about it later. So instead of standing there being agitated, or the word should, she should be late, she's not respecting me, et cetera, all those thoughts come up. They're just thoughts. And so let's say she's late for whatever reasons. You're going to have to be waiting there anyway. So now you're waiting there totally agitated and upset, where you could actually just be enjoying the sun, being outside, having some quiet, right? But we get ourselves into these mental feelings based on thoughts, right? So instead of relaxing and taking advantage of her being late to actually just relax for a second, generally the opposite problem occurs. So by being aware how these cognitive distortions affect your state of mind, it makes a huge difference in actually substituting. So what I'm not advocating, though, is positive thinking. So positive thinking is just another way of suppressing negative thinking. So this is positive substitution. You become aware of what it is, become aware of its effect on your nervous system, and then you substitute.
Like in this case, what would you substitute it with in the case of the example that your wife was late?
Well, I say, I don't honestly know what's going on. I mean, there might be a very good reason why she's late, and I just honestly don't know. At this very second, I actually don't know why she's late. So then we can talk about it later. I obviously can't talk about it when I'm upset. Obviously, that's not going to help. And but I get but what sets off my nervous system is the word should. She shouldn't be late. She should be more considerate. All these thoughts start going through my brain, and they fire up the nervous system, and it's not helpful.
I know. I see that because Lloyd has a lot of that, as you know, and we'll have an appointment for someone to come to the house at 2:00. Or maybe they'll say 12 to 2 and it'll be 12:05 and he'll go, God, he's not here. And I'm thinking, but you're here all day anyway, but he can get himself worked in a tizzy over it because, like you said, if you think people should be on time, well, that's a judgment. And then you're setting yourself up constantly for disappointment.
So, we discussed, the Hoffman process a little bit. That's a 7-day workshop in Napa, California, and also on the East Coast. And they do, it's a 3-dimensional version of CBT. In other words, anytime you're anxious or angry, you're in a survival pattern. In other words, by definition, if you're anxious or upset, you're in a survival pattern. So remember, stress by definition is going to be a threat. Any threat means adrenaline to defend yourself. So what happens, you're creating a little bit of a space between the stimulus and the response. So instead of being stimulus automatic survival response, it becomes stimulus choice of response. So as you write things down and become aware, you create a little bit of space between the stimulus and the response. In that little bit of a space, you start substituting. It actually changes the physical structure of your brain.
In the substitution, you're clear to say that it's not from positive thinking. That substitution is more like rational thinking.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, one of the terms for cognitive behavioral therapy is rational emotive therapy. So again, instead of having these cognitive distortions that send you off into orbit, why you just step back and understand that, again, when you're in a survival reaction, why it's not rational. It's part of the unconscious brain, way more powerful than the conscious brain. And so you just got to let it fly. You cannot suppress it without consequences.
Time to take your break and get a little drink of water. And while you do that, I'm going to keep it short and just say thank you to all of you out there using my Amazon banner. I so appreciate you. And for those of you that are new, please consider the Vidal Speaks podcast for your Amazon purchases. If you just go to my website at vidalspeaks.com and click on that Amazon banner and then just bookmark it and put that on your bookmarks bar, and that way you just click on that, and every time you want to go purchase something through Amazon, it just lets you buy through that link, which gives us a little commission, and you have total privacy. There's no way that we find out anything that you buy or who's buying or names or anything like that. So if you consider the Vidal Speaks podcast, I'll love you forever. And you guys, if you haven't left a review, I'd love to ask you to leave a review in iTunes. You know, this is really important to getting the show rankings up so that we can just keep trying to heal millions of people in the world. And lastly, if you know anybody in chronic pain, please share this episode with them. I am sure it will help them. All right, you guys, now back to the show. Yeah, and I'm curious, in your experience, like I know there are a lot of people who have had horrible things, as you said, parents who've had a child murdered, and there's a strong reason to be angry. But there's also millions of people that aren't speaking to someone, a family member, a friend, whatever, that maybe some small or insignificant thing, and that was it. They just cut them off, right. Finished. And I just wonder what, if in your opinion, I would like to know, why is it so hard for people to forgive? And B, if there's a type of personality, like a stereotypical personality that has a harder time forgiving than another.
Well, we deal with a lot of people with drug abuse issues because I'm a spine surgeon, and people with drug abuse end up with infected spines from IV drug use. And it's remarkable how almost every person I deal with that has chronic pain, substance abuse, etc., is just angry. And I'm convinced that anger is flat out the driving force that's destructive. So anger plays out in a bunch of ways. First of all, you have physical symptoms. In other words, your body's full of adrenaline. There's over 30 symptoms of an adrenalinized nervous system. We've talked about that, migraine headaches, burning feet, PTSD, all those things. So you have direct physical symptoms from being angry on a sustained level. The second thing, though, anger is destructive, including self-destructive. So anger plays out horribly in the families as far as being abusive to people around you, number one. So it has a huge factor in the bullying factor. But more importantly, it's self-destructive. So I never could figure out why people would have complete, absolute disregard for their health, is because it's a slow suicide. Anger is destructive, so we don't take care of yourself. It's destructive. So I think the reason people, again, there's a huge need to remain a victim. That's why people can't let it go. They'll find something. In other words, like I talked about before, you might be walking around the lake, having a beautiful day. Your brain is going to land on something negative, and it feels powerful to be angry. People become addicted to it. That's why it's so hard to let go, because it's not rational. It makes no sense.
Wow, that's just, it doesn't, it's crazy actually when you think of it, isn't it?
Right. So it makes no sense to have, you're at home this evening, I'm home, it's a beautiful evening down there, I'm assuming. So why would you let something that happened 30 years ago screw up your evening tonight? You know what I mean? It makes no sense. So Fred Luskin made a great point in one of the seminars we did together, was it's fine to say, look, my parents screwed up my life until 18 years old. Then at age 18, I took over my own life and I continued to screw it up. So again, people don't want to take responsibility. They want to hang on to the blame. Again, I'm not pointing fingers at other people, because I do the same thing. Again, this victim thing is so powerful, nobody wants to give it up. There's never going to be any day you're going to wake up and say, I don't want to be a victim. I mean, people disguise it in an endless number of ways. I wrote a website post a few months ago called The Angry Meditator. So I not that everybody's like this, but it's not hard to be calm in the middle of a mountain and relaxing. But I watch the same people under stress. I'm a spine surgeon, which has plenty of stress. I get them in situations where just a fraction of the stress I'm under every day, and they just explode. So I'm not being critical. I think everybody has their trigger points, and everybody does the best they can do. But again, meditation is a reprogramming tool. It is not a tool to counteract anger. So remember, with neuroplasticity, you have to let go before you can. So it's awareness, separation, reprogramming. So you have to become aware of the anger. You have to acknowledge it. I realize that skilled meditators actually are supposed to feel the emotions, and then they let them go. So highly skilled meditators can do this. I couldn't do it. I think meditation is a very powerful tool, but you have to be careful that you're not using meditation in an odd way to suppress the anger that's there. So it's starting to come out in the lay literature more, but the essence of mental health is actually becoming comfortable with very uncomfortable emotions, because as you quit fighting them, they start losing their power. If you want to fight these dragons, you're giving them a tremendous amount of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you think in terms of pathways and neurological attention, it all starts fitting together pretty well. If and you can't talk it over, you can't solve it. And I say, like, if you want to try to solve your anger and anxiety by talking about it, you must have put your hand right into a hornet's nest, because it's all anger survival patterns. There's nothing there. So you find out who you are by clearing the air first, letting go, and then becoming aware throughout the day. I mean, I go to the victim role at least 5 to 7 times every day. And again, I think I told you when I gave myself the label of, quote, being enlightened, my wife wanted to kill me because I lost awareness. So I was so cool, I was so calm, I was above being angry, I was just oblivious. So I'm now committed to realize I get victimized every day, a lot of it legitimate, and I become aware of my reaction, and I try to let it pass. I'm not as good at this as I would like. And just for example, last week I got triggered tremendously for about 3 days beyond words. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't suppress, I couldn't do anything. I was just only helplessly triggered. And I was so triggered that I had a hard time not acting on it. And if I had acted on it, it would have been a political disaster. I was right. In other words, I was absolutely right to be angry. Remember, the more legitimate your anger, the harder it is to let go. But I've been at this game long enough to realize I'm always going to be triggered. There's never going to be a point in time where my anger pathways are gone. I think I was talking to you and Lloyd a few weeks ago where it hit me as I was talking to you, is that I can't get rid of my anger. That's who I am. My core patterns from childhood were essentially all anger. Mm-hmm. So what do I do? What do I do with that? I'm not going to fix that. So that's who I am. So once I understand that's who I am, then I can start threading my way through this maze and find the parts of life that are good. And as I connect with myself with the parts of life that are good, I've got to just honestly become aware of what's holding me back. And just, every day, just let a little bit go here and there. Some days I get pulled right back into it. Some days I break completely loose. But becoming aware of these patterns that are holding me back, then allows me to have some chance of going forward.
What I just kind of got that you said that feels so strongly to me, it's like, okay, that's who you are, and you're aware of that, and every day you become more aware of that. But what was really profound, what you said, is that even if you are right and you have a right to be angry, you still have to let it go, the same as if you aren't right, because anger is anger.
Right. So I tell my patients there's real anger and there's perceived anger. In other words, perceived anger is, somebody should have done this, or they didn't do that, or I didn't get invited to a party or whatever, or somebody hurt my feelings. That, in my mind, is what I call perceived anger. Real anger is somebody assaulted me, somebody robbed me, somebody killed my child, or I'm in chronic pain. Those are all legitimate reasons to be angry. But the sequence is the same. You have a circumstance, you blame, you're a victim, then you're angry. The problem is with legitimate victimhood, it's much harder to let go. But the chemical result is the same.
Yeah.
And see, we all intellectually know this. We all know we sort of shouldn't be angry. And I know I belong to a compassion group, which is great. The problem is that everybody knows we should be compassionate. Everybody knows that we should be nice. The problem is when you're triggered, it's just irrational and it's powerful and just wipes everything out. So if the world is going to change, it's not going to be by marketing more compassion, which is great. It's going to be actually teaching the world how to process their anger.
But can compassion help you out of it? Let's say you're walking around the lake, it's a beautiful night, and you're a person who's easily triggered by anger or easily in the victim mode, and you are should be like this, or that person should be like this kind of personality, and suddenly you see somebody do something wrong or another thing you notice because you're kind of always noticing what's wrong. Can't you train yourself to be compassionate or grateful for in the moment what's so beautiful, and would that help you out of that anger mode?
There's two parts of it. So the answer is yes, but with a definite conversation. So when I'm not triggered, I mean, I really do look around me, and we have sanitation. We can fly around the country. I live in a nice house. I mean, I have an incredible gratitude that I don't live in the dark ages, or I don't live in Syria right now. So, I mean, incredible gratitude. So I actually nurture that every day. And so it really does help develop compassion. I've watched people that don't get to understand these tools at the mercy of their anger. So we actually eventually develop a compassion for people who are angry and acting badly because they're suffering pretty badly. So that's part of the equation. But the problem is that when you're flat out triggered, you can't use compassion to combat the anger at that moment. So the compassion is a reprogramming tool where you have to first separate, become aware of how angry you are, become aware how triggered you are, then you separate. Then when that wave of adrenaline is passed, then you can go back to being compassionate. When you're using compassion to sort of combat anger, or you're trying to, in a way, it's a way of positive thinking, that something's going really bad and you're trying to be grateful for what you have, that actually doesn't work because it's just, again, a mismatch about the conscious versus unconscious brain. So affirmations don't work, gratitude doesn't work while you're angry, and you have to honestly allow yourself to feel incredibly angry, take the hit, then you just learn to sit with it. So you can actually do meditations when you're angry of actually letting yourself think about something you absolutely despise and just allow yourself to stay relaxed. In other words, you allow yourself to feel the emotions and not react to them. Same thing with compassion. You can do compassion meditations, just sitting here, and look around you, and just really appreciate what you have and think about it, let your mind settle on that. So it's a very powerful tool, but one doesn't combat the other.
So if you practice compassion on all the minutes of the day that you were not in the active mode of anger, then that practice maybe would eventually, I mean, it wouldn't make you, as you said, if you're kind of angry person and that's your wiring, you're probably always triggered like that. But if you practice compassion in those moments when you're not triggered, you would become more aware of the things you're grateful for, and maybe it would be easier to get untriggered whenever you would get triggered again.
Right. No, I agree with that. So you think about the book The Way to Love by Anthony DeMello. So he's basically saying the way to awareness. So in other words, of course, love and compassion are essentially the same word, right? So really it's the way to awareness. So the essence of compassion is becoming aware. So you look at that person who you've labeled as a derelict or whatever it is, but what you're not seeing is that person was probably abused, or who knows what's going on, or you know, maybe their wife just kicked them out of the house, maybe their kid had leukemia. You don't know.
Right.
So what you start doing, which makes the world incredibly more interesting, is that you start practicing awareness, which is equivalent to compassion. So again, the antithesis of awareness is anger. Remember, awareness is seeing things around you as clearly as you can. Anger is only about you. So basically, awareness connects, anger disconnects.
And what you said when you were talking earlier about categorizing, like in those categories of labeling or whatever, you probably now are trained enough to do that, because if you make a judgment on someone and you think someone should be something, then you see a person and you are upset because they didn't do something the way you thought they should, you're probably automatically going, oh, there I go, I'm labeling again. Right. And maybe his wife just left him, or maybe, you know, his child is in the hospital with cancer and he's just in a bad mood today. So you're probably now in a frame of mind that you can just automatically do that. But for people who are listening today and this is new to them, they should go through the process of doing that categorizing and then coming up with a rational idea until it becomes more natural, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So, you know, I wrote the book Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain. But if you go to stage 2, basically there's 5 steps of going through the anger process, with the first one becoming aware that you're angry. Again, I thought it was really cool before I got exposed to my anger, which I didn't know I honestly had. The second thing is become aware of your unawareness. In other words, how are you disguising your anger? The third thing is to understand how you're a victim and admit it. The next step, this is a part of the entire book that there's no shortcut but it's really simple, is that there's no point, like I said before, that you're going to wake up one morning and say, I don't want to be a victim. You are always going to want to be a victim. So I actually have my patients sometimes just sit in the room, I'll leave, and say, when you walk out of the store, you're simply going to make a commitment, I'm not going to be a victim. Now, it may last for 5 or 10 minutes, it may last for a day or two. You'll go back into the victim role, but I swear, every time it hits, I want to stay a victim. It feels really good and powerful to me. So I just have to over and over again say, look, not going to do that, not going to do that, not going to do that. It's not positive thinking. It's just simply a choice. I'm not going to be a victim. It may not come out of it right away, but you realize that there's no shortcuts here. You just simply got to come out of the victim mode. There's no shortcuts.
Mm-hmm. And I know you don't know homeopathy, but I thought you might find this interesting because as a homeopath with a practice for 20 years, we have a lot of patients whose etiology for their whatever syndrome is they're coming for is grief, disappointment, or anger. And there's specific remedies that deal with anger and grief. Like, for example, I'll give you a name of a remedy called Nature Muriaticum. So the remedy is Nature Mur is the short name, and it's made from salt. And the people that need this remedy, they have a really hard time forgiving. They dwell on the past. There's a symptom in our books because they're written back in the 1700s, and it's dwell on the past disagreeable circumstances. And they just can't get it out of their head, and they just play whatever event it was over and over in their head as if they're clinging to that traumatic or angry experience. And this is one remedy. So when a patient sits with me, our first appointments are 3 hours, and we go through not just family history and symptoms, but you learn a lot about the person, and you can just hear it in their story, and they become very bitter and very angry. And this remedy is a fantastic remedy to kind of help people because homeopathy is a kind of energy medicine, so it kind of helps lift them out of that experience. Versus, let's say, another remedy where the patient comes and they had a horrible grief, maybe the same grief as the other person had, but instead of them clinging and going over and over in it and becoming angry and bitter, this patient just gets stuck and they're crying. And even 10 years later, they're crying, hours every day, just as if it had just happened. I had a patient like that. His sister had died. He was in such a grief and he was crying and crying. And then I found out that she died 10 years ago, and he was sitting in my office as if it was just last week. And he had this horrible rheumatoid arthritis, and they were going to operate on his thumb. And I asked him, can you just give me like 6 weeks and let's try a remedy? Because I felt really strongly about that this remedy would help him, because it just matched his whole story, his family history of cancer, his over perfectionistic, his trying to save the world, and his horrible grief where he's still crying. And I gave him this remedy, and his rheumatologist called me and asked what I gave him because all his blood markers were down and he didn't need the surgery. So It's just interesting, though, when I hear you talk about this, I can't help it as a homeopath. I think all the time when you tell me stories about how people makes me think of different remedies. So homeopathy has been a great tool to help me understand, that certain people get triggered more easily or hang on to something longer, and it's just a harder thing for them. It's not necessarily just because they had a bad childhood, because I certainly saw patients that had a horrible childhood, and then maybe their child was murdered, and they're the person that goes to the prison that visits the guy that murdered their daughter. You know what I mean?
Right.
So some people have the capability not only to forgive, but to speak to that person and take them into their life and do something with them. We've all seen stories like that on TV.
Well, the thing is about these whole thing you just described, I call it phantom brain pain. You get these spinning circuits that are not rational. So at some level, everybody knows it's wrong to be angry all the time. But again, you can't help it. You've got to break up the circuit. So what you're describing is we talk about expressive writing is one way of breaking up the circuits. Awareness is another way. The homeopathic remedies you just described is another way. So you're basically somehow trying to break up these spinning irrational circuits that are incredibly powerful. Talk therapy can help give you some framework and reframing the situation. So there's never usually one answer to it. It's usually a combination of things. And so I think whatever a person can do to break through it, I think is really critical. But you have to break through. So what I had done a lot of talk therapy for years, and I intellectually forgiven my mother for her abuse, but I hadn't really felt it and internalized it. And I think I talked to you about the Hoffman process. It was actually the Hoffman process. I actually get to feel it and then release it, changed my life. And so it allowed me to feel and actually have true deep compassion for my mother, because she never ever lived a life that was full and rich. She was always angry, which is a very dark place to spend your life. She never got to come out of that hole.
I've seen that in my practice too, where people have done talk therapy for years and years, and they think they're over it, but their body's telling you quite differently because they have all these symptoms. And, you may say you're over it, but your body's not saying you're over it. So in a lot of cases, it doesn't work.
The part that medicine has missed, just to be blunt here, is that when you're angry, it changes your body's chemistry, so your stress chemicals are way up, creates all these physical symptoms. So as you know, there's numerous medications for these many different symptoms where the root cause is actually the adrenalized nervous system. So the treatment of choice isn't medications or surgery, it's actually just calming down the nervous system. And it's unbelievable how many symptoms disappear once you calm down the nervous system. But that's a key issue for some reason has not hit mainstream medicine, which is actually basic high school physiology, is that when you're under stress, the body chemistry changes. And it's been documented in hundreds of research papers that stress kills. People that live stress-angry lives live a shorter lifespan. So this is not about psychology. This is the body's response to unpleasant stimuli. It's going to be a sustained stress response, and people get sick. So you have physical chemical changes, and you have physical symptoms.
Yeah, they really have missed the boat on that. I mean, drugs can only take it so far, and as we know from and I'm sure you see every single day with the opioid epidemic that's going on right now, I mean, that's a short-term, at best, fix and not really a fix at all. Do you think it's harder to forgive yourself or forgive others?
Well, I mean, what I've learned is that if I'm judgmental, if I'm critical of somebody else, I've simply projected my view of me onto that person. It's like a one big movie projector. So the way you learn to forgive yourself is by forgiving other people. The way you learn to forgive other people is by forgiving yourself. And people do forget that they're incredibly judgmental about other people, but it's simply their own judgment of themselves projected under another person. So then people go through a forgiveness process where they work on forgiving others, which is great, but then they're still perfectionistic. They're holding on to that. So until you let go of all of it, you really can't heal, right? So I also point out when you forgive, it has to be your absolute deepest wounds. And it's hard to do for some people, but the reality is it's a lot easier doing that than it is holding on to it and destroying your whole life.
And it's difficult because, as you said, there's no real way to know if you've forgiven. I just know when you've had, it's like in your case, when you've had a horrible childhood, it's so many years and it's so many abusive stories that you want to say you've forgiven, and you say, I forgave my mother, but then you look back until you did that Hoffman work, you said, now I can see that I've forgiven, but all those years before you probably thought you had. So it's really difficult forgiveness because the process isn't like, okay, yes, I did it, now I'm better. It's just that's always been a hard thing for me, is to kind of know, because so many patients would tell me that they forgave their parents or their mother or their father who raped them, but yet you could feel that they hadn't. So if they're really thinking they had, I mean, what a pity.
Right.
It just seems that people are lost in this world of thinking that they're not angry anymore, but they still really are. So I wish there was a more obvious way to know if we've done the work.
Well, but see, that's why I was saying earlier that this is an evolutionary process for me in my thinking, is that you can't come up with a definition that you are forgiven or not. And like Fred Luskin points out, it's a process. And some days you're more angry than others. So again, I think it goes back to the awareness model. Is if you feel angry, is obviously something that you haven't forgiven. You sort of just work back one day at a time because there's so many trillions of thoughts in your brain. You're not going to get all these covered, right? So it's more of a process that when you become triggered, you just sort of watch the process, become aware of what happened, realizing that, again, our definition of forgiveness or not is actually not rational either, right? Sort of an arbitrary definition. So it takes energy in a way defining whether you're forgiven or not. And again, going to the awareness model, I think I've said this before, at a certain point in a way you just give up, you let go, you become aware of everything. Become aware of your happiness, you become aware of your anxiety, become aware of your anger. And you start living to the next experience without actually even labeling it anymore. You just get to just do the next experience. So again, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're not. You're never going to be perfectly over anger forever. That's never going to happen. But again, you don't have to be.
Yeah, it's really an art to learn to let go, because actually just being aware allows you to see it and feel it, and then you let it go, and then you're living in the moment. But when you don't let something go, you're just not able to live in the moment anymore.
You see, if you go back to the awareness model, is that, okay, maybe you're holding on to it for a minute or two. Last week it took me 3 days, but you do become aware when you're angry versus not. It's just, I think, to be the awareness when you're actually triggered is a big deal. And so, again, I'd love to never be angry again. And I love to be enlightened enough that I teach this stuff, so why should I ever be angry? So when I get angry about being angry, right? It's a double hit.
Yeah.
So I got to forgive myself or let myself go. And I still think the word letting myself off the hook is an easier word for me in a way than forgiveness. I'll use the word selfish act. It's maybe not exactly the correct word, but you're really just declaring your right to live on this planet and live life on your terms, taking full responsibility, as opposed to being angry and frustrated, which means you're taking no responsibility. So it's a hugely freeing experience just to live your life on your terms and not blaming the world or other people for your problems. It's an incredibly freeing experience.
I'm a freedom-loving person, and anger is a trap, and it puts you in a box and a trap for life.
Yep.
So I get that. Okay, and if someone has passed away, like I had a lot of cases of women who were raped by a father, an uncle, or something like that, and many of them had conversations with them because they were alive, and they got to a point where they wanted to confront them. But from what you're saying today, to forgive someone, it's not necessary for them to have to confront them. And even if the person has passed away, forgiveness is still very possible. Is that correct?
Yeah, again, people get into these global definitions of forgiveness. So no, you don't have to confront the person personally at all. It might feel good for a second, but the reality is it doesn't really solve the problem. So again, you want to live your life today, this very second. And so again, just connecting with what's in front of you and learning how to enjoy your life. And so again, it's like picking your way through a maze. It's that the anger maze is all around you. You just start learning how to get through the maze more quickly and faster, and learn how to go towards the freedom.
Yeah, and I think if you learn that you're forgiving more for yourself than you are for anyone else, it'll be a lot easier process.
Right.
And then, Dr. David, can you leave us with 3 tips if people want to really think about how to get on the road to forgive someone? What 3 things should they read or start or do to get on that road?
The first step is to admit that you're angry, become aware of it, which is a big step for a lot of people. Second of all, you have to commit to living a life from freedom. So you have to really ask yourself, how much do I really want to give up my victimhood? Because a lot of people really don't. And if you don't want to do it, you're sort of wasting your time a little bit. So that's really a huge step in becoming aware of the advantages of being angry for you. And then and the third thing is that you just have to go through the tools are on the website, backincontrol.com. You're just going through the steps. So there's writing exercises, there's awareness. It's a process. It's not an intellectual exercise. So a lot of times having coaching helps. I think talk therapy can be supportive and helpful for the situation. It doesn't solve it by itself. But all these situations that give you support to help you move through it, I think is really, really helpful. But I think the biggest thing is really being honest with yourself that you are angry, and even more importantly, how much do you really want to give it up?
And you write so many great articles because they're not really long, but they're very deep and to the point. So I highly recommend it. I've read most of what's on your site. It's really fantastic. So backandcontrol.com is your website, and just there's lots of, that's amazing itself. I just find myself clicking and clicking and clicking and keep finding me in places that I haven't seen before. So I really love your articles because they're to the point and short, and you title them in a way that makes a lot of sense. So I really appreciate your work, and I hope people who have a problem with forgiveness or are aware that they have anger would buy your book. And because I think your book is the one that focuses the most on the idea of anger and anxiety, because we've been reading the Feeling Good book a little bit, and that talks a lot about depression. I think it's a wonderful book, but your book really hits the nail on the head with anger. So I love that.
Right. It's been an incredibly rewarding phase of my career. I never expected to see so many people go to pain-free. It's been unbelievable. So another 3 or 4 people the last couple of days.
Wow. Must be just so amazing to be in the position you're in with spine surgeons all over the country, scheduling patient after patient for these incredible surgeries that are just life-changing, many times not for the better.
Right.
And here you are getting people pain-free, not even doing a surgery. I commend you for that one. That's amazing.
So by the way, this is a final thought here, completely off the topic. Remember we talked about family issues before?
Right.
Remember I told you about this young couple about 25 years old that I talked to about a month ago about the whole family thing? It's incredible how well they're doing. Just having this structure around triggers and how couples trigger each other, and he's pain-free after 2.5 years. Within 1 month, he's pain-free. And they are so excited. So, I'm so energized just by that one interaction this week. It's really exciting.
That's really wonderful. Well, thanks so much for sharing all your thoughts on, I know anger and forgiveness are really intertwined, and I really appreciate all your expertise. Just, sadly, I know, as you say, it's only because of your own experience, and it's been a rough road, but what a journey, because to me, life is about the process and not the end. And you've certainly walked a path that has been able to be a gift to give so many others. So thank you so much for doing this with me today and giving us all this wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate the chance to talk to other people about this, so that's great. So thanks.
Wow, I love that interview. Dr. David is such a humble man, kind, compassionate, and he gives so much time to helping others and teaching them this journey of how to get out of chronic pain. Imagine a spine surgeon telling patients they don't need surgery, that they just need to forgive and to write on a piece of paper and tear it up. I know it sounds hard to believe, but I'm working on getting one of his patients on the show so you guys can hear his story, because he had severe pain and now he lives life really to the fullest. I learned some things too today. I learned that when he spoke of perfectionism, that it's more of a person who thinks they know how things should be done, and in the end, they impose their view on the world. I also learned the word should means that we have expectations, and once we have expectations, then we're imposing what we think is right. So now I'm being very mindful of using the word should. In the book that first helped Dr. David, which is a book called Feeling Good by David D. Burns, MD, Dr. Burns says that when we're upset, we are fooling ourselves and that our thinking is not rational. He gives a list of 10 cognitive distortions, which are what David Hanscom was talking about when he said that his wife was late, and then he would catch himself using the labeling distortion. But when he can realize that and become aware of that, only then can he put a new, more rational thought into his mind. Labeling is one of the 10 cognitive distortions, but I wanted to know what the other 9 were. So I went into the book and I looked them up, and I'm going to read them off because I thought you too might be interested. Okay, number 1 is all or nothing thinking. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Number 2, overgeneralization. He says a single negative event is seen as a never-ending pattern. Number 3, mental filter, which is dwelling on a single negative factor. Number 4, disqualifying the positive. I think that speaks for itself. Number 5, jumping to conclusions, which is negative interpretation without any facts. He calls it either mind reading, which is kind of like making conclusions without checking, or fortune telling, which is predicting how something will turn out without knowing. So that's number 5. Number 6, magnification or minimization. Like you over-exaggerate something or you under-exaggerate something about someone or yourself. Number 7, emotional reasoning, which is where you assume your negative emotions are reality. Number 8, should statements towards others cause anger, frustration, and resentment. When it's towards yourself, the emotion that is felt is guilt. Number 9, labeling and mislabeling. He says that when others' behavior rubs you the wrong way, you label them. Maybe you call them an idiot, a loser, whatever. But he says that mislabeling describes an event with language that is highly colored or an emotionally loaded language. Number 10, personalization. He describes this as when you see yourself as the cause of a negative external event. So that means when you feel frustrated, angered, or anxious, you should now ask yourself, what distortion category am I using? And what's the rational thought that I can replace that distortion with? I love when Dr. David was telling us that example of his wife being late. So here's another example. Let's say I'm waiting for my friend to pick me up from my house at 6 p.m. and now it's 6:10 and she's not here. I start saying, oh, she's a flake, or she's so disrespectful. She doesn't care enough about me to be on time. Maybe this is my automatic thought, but the more I think this, the angrier I get and the more adrenaline I shoot out and I oversensitize that nervous system. With someone in chronic pain, this is a killer for sure, but it's not good for any of us. So the first step is being aware. Just be aware what we're doing and that our thoughts are not rational and they're just a distortion of reality. Then the next step would be to see what category of distortion are we using. I could say, oh, I see I'm labeling her, or I'm jumping to conclusions and I'm magnifying the situation. And then finally, I can replace all that with a more rational, real thought such as, well, I don't really know what happened or why she's late, but it's a beautiful evening out here, so I'm just going to enjoy the beauty while I wait for her. I know she really does care about me, and just because she's late tonight doesn't mean she doesn't care. That's just me coming to conclusions. And after I do this, then my anger level drops and my nervous system gets quieted down. So in the beginning, you may find yourself doing this all day long with every single thought if you're an easily angered or easily triggered person. But soon, your awareness will be so great that you'll be realizing how many times a day you actually trigger that poor nervous system. And now you're going to retrain yourself to think more rationally first with practice, and soon it will come more naturally like anything else. The more I learn from Dr. David, the more I realize just how important that awareness step is. And honestly, as a professional golfer, I realize the importance of awareness and how important it is to stay present in the moment with our awareness. So thanks, Dr. Hanscom, for teaching us how important awareness is, but also for that great reference of Dr. Burns' chart for the distortions. I think that's a great tool for all of us to now know what to do with our anger and to learn how to calm down the nervous system once we do get it triggered. That's very useful. I love it. Well, you guys, I think I'm going to end it here. I sure hope you learned today, and may you become more and more aware every day so that you can keep your nervous system as healthy as possible. And in those moments when you do feel triggered, you now have some good tools: active meditation or mindfulness, expressive writing, and replacing distortions with rational thoughts. So cool, isn't it? Well, I know that you know what time it is. It's time to say goodbye. Till next week, eat lots of plants and be well and stay aware. Vidal has spoken. Remember, you can heal with a plant-powered diet, homeopathy, and detoxing, of course. Peace. Be healthy. Be free. Live life.